Somewhere in the ground right now, there are nearly 40 sites where scientists believe a Neanderthal was deliberately buried. Bones placed carefully, bodies positioned with intention, objects left alongside the dead, and we cannot tell you a single name. Not one. Most people assume that's because Neanderthals were too primitive to care about identity, too cognitively limited to attach meaning to a person's death. But that assumption has been quietly falling apart for decades, and the research coming out right now is making it collapse entirely. What the evidence actually shows is stranger and more unsettling than the simple story of a lesser species that didn't quite make it. The real question hiding inside this one isn't why there's no name on the stone, it's what the absence of that name tells us about who Neanderthals actually were and what we lost when they disappeared. There are nearly 40 sites around the world where scientists believe a Neanderthal was deliberately buried. 40, and we still can't say with certainty who any of them were. No name, no identity, no way to know if they were a leader, a parent, a healer, just bones in the ground, and a debate that has been going on for over 100 years about whether anyone even put them there on purpose. Here's what this video is about. We're going to dig into what we actually know about Neanderthal burial, why the evidence is so much messier than most people realize, and then, right at the end, we're going to get to the thing that almost nobody talks about, which is the single most unsettling detail hiding inside all of this. It reframes the whole question, and I promise, by the time we get there, the title of this video is going to hit completely differently than it does right now. A quick note on where I'm coming from. This script draws on peer-reviewed studies and recent excavation research, including findings published in Time's Nature Human Behavior Times just this year. So everything here is current, and some of it is genuinely new. Let's start with the thing that sounds the most obvious, but is actually the most complicated. Did Neanderthals even bury their dead at all? There is a long-standing debate about whether Neanderthals buried their dead or if this is a funerary rite unique to our species. And the reason this debate has lasted so long isn't because we lack evidence. It's because the evidence we have is almost impossible to interpret cleanly. Here's the problem. When you find a Neanderthal skeleton lying in a shallow pit inside a cave, you have a few possible explanations. Someone dug that pit and placed the body there deliberately. Or the body ended up there through natural processes, water movement, sediment shifts, animals dragging remains, or some combination of both. The bones don't come with a note attached. So for most of these sites, the argument comes down to probability and context, and scientists disagree about where to draw the line. The case that launched the entire debate happened in 1908. Two brothers, the Boissoney brothers, end quote, were excavating a site called La Chapelle-aux-Saints in southwestern France, and they pulled out a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton. They argued it had been deliberately buried. The burial study was led by New York University paleontologist William Renn, and it took roughly a century of follow-up work to actually confirm the Boissoney brothers had been right. Evidence from the La Chapelle site also suggests that Neanderthals cared for their sick and elderly D skeleton, belonged to a Neanderthal who was missing most of his teeth and showed signs of hip and back problems that would have made movement difficult without assistance. As Renn put it, before they took care of his dead body, the other members of his group would have had to have taken care of his living one. That detail matters, because it means whoever was buried at La Chapelle wasn't just buried bud, they were also cared for while alive. That's not a species that treats its members as disposable. And yet, for over 100 years, the mainstream scientific position was essentially, we're not sure they buried anyone at all. Now here's where it gets interesting, and this is the second strongest piece of evidence in this whole story, so pay attention. A study published in Time's Anthropology Times examined a total of 17 Neanderthal and 15 Homo sapiens burials from various archaeological sites, and it revealed both similarities and differences in how these two species treated their dead, including differences in burial location, body posture, and specific grave goods. Both species buried their dead. Both buried individuals, regardless of age or sex. Both species buried individuals accompanied by grave goods such as animal remains and stone artifacts, wild goat horns, deer antlers, and red ochre were common in Homo sapiens burials, while Neanderthals included items like tortoise shells and modified limestone. But here's the split that nobody talks about enough. They buried their dead in completely different places. Neanderthals tended to bury their dead inside caves, while modern humans placed their burials at cave entrances or in rock shelters. Modern human burials were more likely to employ a flexed posture for the deceased, while Neanderthal burials were more varied, using flexed, extended, and semi-flexed positions. Neanderthals were also more likely to place the body between rocks, or to use modified pieces of limestone as a headrest. So when you lay these two sets of burials side by side, you see real, consistent differences in how each species treated the dead. Not random variation, not coincidence. A pattern, which means both species had burial customs, tutorial customs, and those customs were distinct from each other. There's one more detail from this study that flips the usual assumption on its head. The conventional wisdom has always been that Homo sapiens valued their dead more, that we were the ones with the deeper emotional and spiritual investment in burial. But the data shows that Neanderthal infant burials were proportionally more common than those of early Homo sapiens in the same region. Think about what that means. The species we've spent a century dismissing as primitive was burying its children at a higher rate than we were. Now, I want to get to the detail that's going to reframe everything. But before I do, there's one more piece of this puzzle that deserves its own moment, because it changes the origin story of burial entirely. Evidence from Tin Shemet Cave in central Israel indicates that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in the mid-middle Paleolithic Levant not only coexisted but actively interacted, sharing technology, lifestyles, and burial customs. These interactions fostered cultural exchange, social complexity, and behavioral innovations such as formal burial practices and the symbolic use of ochre for decoration. The cave has revealed several human burials, the first mid-middle Paleolithic burials unearthed in over 50 years. And the research, published in Times Nature Human Behavior Times in April 2026, indicates these groups did not merely coexist but actively interacted, sharing advanced tools, survival strategies, and symbolic behaviors that drove technological progress. Here's what that means in plain terms. Burial might not have been something either species invented independently. Formal burial customs began to appear around 110,000 years ago in Israel for the first time worldwide, likely as a result of intensified social interactions. The two species were in the same region, at the same time, and they both started burying their dead at roughly the same moment. The placement of artifacts such as stone tools, animal bones, and ochre chunks within the burial pits suggests early beliefs in the afterlife, implying the presence of shared societal rituals and strong communal bonds. So the question, did Neanderthals bury their dead, might actually be the wrong question. The better question might be, did they teach us how? The finds in Tin Shemet Cave show that Neanderthals, early Homo sapiens, and possibly other human lineages influenced each other's behavior for tens of thousands of years. And while we are still waiting to know if the remains are of hybrids of modern humans and Neanderthals, the shared cultural elements are clear evidence of long-term interaction. Now, here's where I need to slow down, because there's something at Shanidar Cave in Iraq that completely changes the scale of this conversation. Located in the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq, Shanidar Cave has yielded some of the most compelling evidence of Neanderthal burial practices. Excavations led by Ralph Selecki in the 1950s and 60s uncovered the remains of 10 Neanderthal individuals, some of whom appear to have been deliberately buried. Shanidar 4 is known as the flower burial, so called because clumps of pollen grains from adjacent sediments were interpreted as evidence for the intentional placement of flowers with the corpse. For decades, this was held up as the most powerful evidence of Neanderthal ritual behavior. The idea that they placed flowers on the body of someone they cared about, the same way people do at funerals today. Then skeptics pointed out that the pollen could have been deposited by burrowing rodents or wind, and the debate started all over again. But here's what the skeptics don't usually mention. New excavations at the same site found additional Neanderthal remains clustered in the same location, suggesting this wasn't just one burial. It was potentially a site that was returned to again and again. Not a single act of grief, but a repeated ritual, a place that meant something. And here's the thing the skeptics' argument actually proves, without meaning to. Some anthropologists have pointed out that many undisputed Homo sapiens burials from the same era also lack grave goods or ceremonial markers. So the evidentiary standard that casts doubt on Neanderthal burials, if you applied it consistently, would cast doubt on plenty of confirmed human ones too. The skeptics aren't just questioning Neanderthals. They're accidentally questioning us. If you're finding this as fascinating as I am, this is the kind of content I make every week, deep dives into the questions that science is still actively wrestling with. Subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss the next one. If you've got a thought on this, whether you think Neanderthals had real ritual consciousness, or you're still skeptical, drop it in the comments. I genuinely read them, and these conversations get good. Now, I promised you a detail that reframes everything. Here it is. This burst of burials came to an abrupt halt around 50,000 years ago, just before the extinction of Neanderthals. According to Professor Renn, this cessation of burials is particularly puzzling, as there was a marked decline in burial activity following the disappearance of Neanderthals. This gap in burial practices lasted until the late Paleolithic, around 15,000 years ago, when the semi-sedentary Natufian culture revived the tradition of burial. Let that sink in. Burial, the practice of intentionally putting someone in the ground, marking their death as meaningful, started roughly 120,000 years ago in the Levant with both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. And then, right around the time Neanderthals went extinct, it stopped completely. Around the same time, human burials in the region also ceased. For thousands of years afterward, no one in the Levant buried their dead, as if the tradition had vanished along with the Neanderthals. 35,000 years, no burials anywhere. Once Neanderthals disappeared in the Levant around 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens burials disappeared as well, as if they no longer had a need to set boundaries or territorial claims once their competition was gone. One interpretation is that burial wasn't primarily about grief or spirituality at all. It might have been about territory, a way of claiming a cave, a landscape, a resource. You are dead here, and you're saying, "This place belongs to us. Our ancestors are in this ground." A new analysis of ancient burials in part of the Middle East called the Levant suggests that the dead may have been used as Paleolithic property deeds, separating Neanderthals from Homo sapiens. And when one species disappeared, the other didn't need to keep doing it anymore. The competition was gone, so the ritual stopped. That is a genuinely disturbing idea. Because it means burial, the practice that we've always held up as the clearest sign of symbolic thought, of emotional depth, of humanity, might have started as a territorial strategy. Not love, not grief, real estate. Now go back to the title. Why has no one ever found a Neanderthal grave with a name on it? The surface answer is obvious. They didn't have writing. They didn't have the tools to inscribe a name on stone or bone in any way that would survive 70,000 years. But the deeper answer is what this video has actually been building toward. We don't have names because we have almost no certainty. Nearly 40 possible Neanderthal burial sites have been proposed since 1908, and scientists still argue over most of them. Only a handful are considered definitively intentional by the wider archaeological community. We don't know who these individuals were, we don't know what they meant to the people who buried them. We don't know if the act of burying them was love, or ritual, or a claim on a piece of land. We have bones, we have pits, we have ochre and tortoise shells and modified limestone. We have a 2-year-old child buried in a rock shelter in France 41,000 years ago. We have a group in Iraq that may have come back to the same spot to bury their dead over and over for generations. We have evidence that Neanderthals decorated themselves with pigment and wore jewelry made of feathers and colored shells, not for survival, but for identity. And we have a 35,000-year silence after they were gone, during which Homo sapiens, us, apparently forgot how to bury our dead or stopped seeing the point, and didn't start again for longer than the entire span of recorded human history. The absence of a name isn't the mystery. The mystery is that we've spent 100 years arguing about whether these graves were real, while the data has been quietly telling us something much stranger, that the ritual of honoring the dead might have been born from competition, shared between species, and then lost entirely when one of them disappeared. We didn't inherit burial from some deep human instinct. We may have invented it together with a species we no longer fully understand, in a region of the world where two kinds of people briefly occupied the same caves, buried their dead in different parts of them, and then one of them vanished. The grave without a name isn't just a Neanderthal grave. It's the record of a conversation between two species that we're only now learning how to read. If this kind of deep history is your thing, there's a video on this channel that goes just as far down the rabbit hole, and it connects to this one in a way you probably won't expect. It's right there when you're ready.